You're listening to the Southern Gospel News Podcast, the most listened to gospel music podcast in the world, with your hosts, Darien Southerland, Southern Gospel Hall of Famer Arthur Rice, and I'm Daniel Britt from Homecoming Radio. Now sit back and relax as you listen to SGNP.
And Kirk Talley here absolutely made this song famous all across the country, called "Moving Up to Glory Land." I like to think about a paradise somewhere beyond the blue. A mansion waiting in that eastern sky, maybe next door to you. We'll go parading the distant star right down the Milky Way. The planet Jupiter, Neptune and Mars won't even be halfway. Moving up to glory land. Oh, it's a moving, holding to his no sky. Don't know when I'm leaving, but I'm ready to go. When I get to heaven, I'll be welcome, I know. Don't you know I'm moving up to glory land. I made my reservations long ago, the day I gave up sin. And when my mansion's ready, this I know I'm gonna move right in. I have a vision of a happy place where the Lord wants me, right on the corner of Love Avenue and Hallelujah Street. Moving up to glory land. Oh, yes, I'm moving, holding to it now, sky. Don't know when I'm leaving, but I'm ready to go. When I get to heaven, I'll be welcome, I know. Don't you know I'm moving up to glory land. Moving up to glory land. Oh, it's a moving, holding to it now, star hand. Don't know when I'm leaving, but I'm ready to go. When I get to heaven, I'll be welcome, I know. Don't you know I'm moving up to glory land. Moving up to glory land.
Welcome to the Southern Gospel News Podcast. I'm Daniel Britt with Darien Southerland and Arthur Rice, and we are here today excited to talk about legendary, and talk about probably one of the most legendary groups in gospel music, defining, iconic. You could just use all kind of adjectives to talk about it today. Cathedrals. In the insiders, you might call them the Cats, but we know them as the Cathedral Quartet, headquartered out of the Cathedral of Tomorrow, Akron, Ohio, right? Where they got their start.
Yep, they got their start there. And you know what? This is the first time we've all been together in quite a while. And Arthur's in the dark. He broke his camera. So what's up with that,
So you
Arthur?
can't see him, but you can hear him.
That's right.
Yes, I'm here. I'm in the dark today.
You're in the dark. You in the church working?
Yes, actually. Yeah.
You know what I heard one time? And this has got to do with church work and gospel music, because the most beloved preacher in all of Southern gospel music, the late Charles Stanley, used to walk the halls of First Baptist Atlanta in the dark all the time, is what his ex-missionary pastor he told me one time in a meeting I had with him. So anyway,
Wow.
So Arthur's one of the music directors walking in the dark over there. Is that the way it works, Arthur?
Yeah. Wednesdays. Yeah, we do 2 services on Wednesdays. It's the longest day in history every week.
Well, Arthur, you should go into fundraising mode and say you need help paying the light bill.
Yes.
Send money.
Send money.
Cash is preferred.
Hey, Daniel, you said we were going to talk about the cathedrals today.
First, ask me about my hat.
Yeah, well, 1 second. I'll get you on your hat. What is that hat, by the way? Let me see that hat.
I'm gonna get in real close. Arthur, can you see at least?
I see it.
I'm gonna get in real close there. Aren't you?
The cathedral's
the
hat.
Signed cathedral's hat.
Now it's signed by Scott Fowler, so I don't know if that brings the value down or what. But a buddy of mine gave me this, so
I'm not going there.
Why didn't you get George and Glen to sign it?
You know, it was given to me just last year. Somebody said, I think I got something you might like, and I'd never seen it before. And I don't know where he got it, but it only has the one signature. So I guess we're missing out there. But I can get Ernie to sign it at least.
Arthur, I got something that I'm going to give the Hall of Fame once I'm dead and gone because my kids ain't going to want it. But you may be dead and gone by then too, but somebody will give it to the Hall of Fame. I've got one of those cathedral buses still in the box. You remember when they used to sell them? You remember when they used to sell the little buses in the car? I got one still in a box. So
that's cool to have. Yeah,
that's cool.
And then I got one of the paintings of George and Glen, that the guy up in Ohio did.
That's right.
I've got everybody's got cathedral memorabilia. I guess I've got a sealed white cover Atlanta Live album with "Moving Up to Glory Land."
Nice.
Wow.
Nice.
They, the story behind that, they came out with that album, released that album, and they in the old days we would get pre-releases without the cover. It'd be just being a plain white cover.
Mm-hmm.
I know Kingsman, we used to do that, before an album came out, we'd get, a few weeks before, like 2 or 3 weeks before, we would get the album and it'd be in a plain white wrapper. And the Cathedrals put out that album, and then Leroy Abernathy retracted their license for Moving Up to Glory Land because Gold City had the first right to record that. They had just released it to radio.
Wow.
So they had to go back and redo the album and remove that song from the album until after Gold City's release. So you can actually buy that album two ways. Then they came back out with, is probably when it went to CD that they released it with Moving Up to Glory Land. So, but the original album that was included on that album. So a little trivia there.
What year was that, by the way?
82.
Yeah. Something like 82, 85. I knew it was somewhere between there.
82. It was 82. It was just before I went with the Kingsmen, and it was just, what had to be 81, 82, somewhere, because Kirk left right after that, and Danny started.
Daniel, talking about the Cathedrals, we played my favorite song by the Cathedrals when we started this morning, or not this morning, this afternoon, or whatever time of day it is when you're listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
How many people know that arguably the most well-known contemporary Christian artist in the world,
right,
Stephen Curtis Chapman, wrote that song?
Yeah.
Arthur, did you know that prior to us talking to Stephen, or me talking to Stephen, or us even bringing that up, that Stephen wrote "I Could See the Hand"? Did you know that?
Yeah, I knew that. Stephen wrote some other popular songs that you wouldn't think.
I Just Started Living.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, there's some interesting things with that. Stephen wrote some big hits for people. That at the time, back when it was called contemporary music. Now they don't.
Yeah.
No real definition for it now.
Well, and I guess you probably wouldn't be talking about the Cathedrals if you didn't make mention of the Weatherfords and the Blue Ridge.
Oh, yeah.
And those, and those that especially Glen and George, came through, and Humbard, and all of the way they got started there. And of course, it's become, there's a few groups, there's a handful of groups out there that are in the legendary status, and I think they're legendary because they also provided alumni, I guess is the right word.
Right.
I mean, the people who came through the group really got more than an education. I think there's almost like a blessing of God that they could then, when they left the group, they went on to do great things, and never lost touch of that.
Arthur, let me ask you this right here. Okay. Mm-hmm. You're an industry guy, born and bred. What is the difference in the Florida Boys' popularity had George been able to stay with the Florida Boys before coming with the Cathedrals? And I know there was, it's a known fact why he left the Florida Boys. We're not going into that today. But, how much more popular would the Florida Boys have been?
Well, you can't, that's the thing with, you can't look back at other groups that like, George was part of, or even Glen was a part of, and say, what would that have been? Because what developed George was Glen, and what developed Glen was George.
Right.
Without the two of them together, you can't say, well, what would it have been? He would have been a great bass singer. Would he have been what he became with the Cathedrals? I mean, you have to kind of look back at the beginning of their, career together. Being with them two together, the chemistry between them two is what developed the Cathedrals.
That's the word.
Yeah. So you can't sit back and say, well, what would George have brought to the Florida Boys, or what, because you don't know, because you don't have any reference for that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, we a lot of times here we'll put together a dream quartet, or if we can handpick, let's put this voice with this voice, and that works. That's fun to do musically, and the talent part of it that would be interesting. But I don't know, some of that wouldn't last, and it's not that they maybe couldn't get along. It's just the chemistry or something about that, and it's hard to put your finger on it.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Something that George and Glen had. That relationship that they had might not have been replicated if it was, George and Les or whoever. So,
no doubt. No doubt.
It's kind of like saying, okay, what would the Cathedrals have been without Kirk?
Yeah.
Kirk developed the sound for them that they didn't have before. They had a unique sound before, but it was pretty traditional. Would they have become, who they were if it weren't for the, the other artists that were with them? It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Well, the Cathedrals. When you think about just the alumni of the Cathedrals, we can talk about the Dixie Melody Boys being a minor league for folks. We can talk about the Wilburns and the Perrys sending people out into starting other groups. But Arthur, how many groups did people leave the Cathedrals for? Think about that. I mean, Danny leaves. Danny told me one time to my face, he said, the biggest mistake I ever made was leaving the Cathedrals to go to Perfect Heart. But he said it was a decision I made at one time, and I made it, Trammell, your buddy, he told us one time that was one of the toughest decisions he ever did, but he said he had to follow the Lord. And he left. Of course, Kirk left to go solo and go on his own. I mean, even back as far as Bobby Clark left to go out on his own, with Buddy Burton and different folks like that. So, how many people came through? I mean, and even now with the late Roger Bennett and Scott Fowler with Legacy 5 and Ernie Haas, even with Signature Sound. I mean, these are Hall of Fame names we're talking about that came out of the group. Gerald Wolfe, from the Dumpling Valley Boys to the Cathedrals to now Greater Vision. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So arguably the Cathedrals could be one of the top minor leagues of all time to form other major groups. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And yet they were major all along, I think, right? I mean, doing the work of both categories there. Yeah,
exactly. But I tell you what really separated the Cathedrals is when they, when I started with the Kingsmen, it was Cathedrals and Kingsborough were on the same, with the same promoter, same record company. So we worked a lot together. The first couple of years I was with the Kings, but I mean, we worked probably at least once a week, with them. I mean, we were with them all the time. Yeah. And then, but I think what separated them was when they made that decision to switch to the church, away from the concert, really to that ministry of the church, and kind of separated themselves from the standard of the all-night sings and the big battle of the bands, all that kind of stuff. That really set them apart. I think it started them on a different journey, really.
Arthur, tell folks what that was, because I understand what you're talking about. Daniel understands what you're talking about. Tell the listener today what you're talking about, how they were separating themselves from doing the concert events and really concentrating on the church. Is that what you're basically saying? Hey, we're going to focus on the church instead of the civic centers. Is that what
Yeah,
you're?
it started out that way. They kind of got away from the, and I say this just because it's not really another way to say it. They kind of got away from the entertainment side of the music and focused it more toward. I always hesitate to mention entertainment and ministry together, but there's an element of each, especially at that level. You go to Hamill used to put it this way: when you're paying $15 a ticket to go see somebody sing, there's an element in entertainment there that you want to see. And any artist, even now, there is an element of entertainment that you go to see the performance, how they do it. But it's also, with geared around ministry. They kind of set themselves apart by kind of getting away from that element of it. Of course, in the 80s, that's what it was the big concerts. You had 4 or 5 groups, and it was just a big, it was a big thing, and that's what people went to see. Kind of the competition between the groups to see who could outdo who, or who was better on stage, or who got the crowd riled up, that sort of thing. And they kind of went away from that, and when it did, it set them apart. Now, for a little while, it felt like they dropped off the planet because they weren't kind of out in the main main street, and as everybody else. But God used that and blessed it, just as He did with anybody else in any kind of in that ministry. But He really, I think really God just put a touch on that, and His anointing. Their songs changed. They went from kind of being showy to really kind of leaning into those real meaty songs and geared toward the church. And they dabbled a little bit at that time in the contemporary side of it. That's when Bill came along, and they kind of did some of the stuff that the vocal band was doing. They kind of brought it around to their style, but they were still doing some of those songs that were kind of edgy at the time, that weren't your traditional straight line Southern gospel. And so that opened different doors for them and different opportunities to sing.
Cool stuff. See, where else are you going to hear that kind of stuff, Daniel?
What you're saying is exactly what I've been thinking about. There's so many layers to the cathedrals to where I feel like, especially probably in the 80s, you can correct me on the date on this, probably pre-homecoming video stuff. I feel like the cathedrals may have been our poster child. If you ask my typical argument is you go man on the street and ask any random person in public about Southern gospel, and if they don't give you some kind of Elvis answer or some kind of country artist answer, the cathedrals in that day might have been the one that kind of would rise to the top, because they held on to their roots, their convention upbringing, their quartet up, the true blue Southern gospel, but they were always innovating. And then that church element kind of added this polish to it, I guess, that, because they could do the soaring tenor and the bass, the dive bombing, and all that stuff, but they could also bring it down, and those denominations, those churches that didn't want the flashy, they could still get the cathedrals to embrace.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think they were on the Today Show once or twice. And so again, that's kind of my argument of representing the whole of the industry.
Think about this right here, okay? And, when one person leaves a group to go to another group, the cachet answer in the business is always, the Lord led us, and let's hope He does lead us, okay? But the backroom industry talk is, man, can you believe such and such left such and such to go somewhere else? I can't. Why would he do that, okay? Danny Funderburk leaves the Singing Americans to go to the cathedrals. Boom. Mark Trammell leaves the Kingsmen, another popular group, to go to the cathedrals.
At a time when they weren't. They were just another group.
Right. Kirk Talley.
They were just coming off of
Yeah.
The TV show with the World Tomorrow and that sort of thing. So
Kurt Talley leaves the Hoppers to go to the Cathedrals. I mean, these are major names that are leaving their groups to go to a group that not a lot of people knew about at the time. I mean, think about that. I mean, Gerald Wolfe had his own little group, the Dumpling Valley folks up there, and, he leaves to go play the piano. Didn't he just leave to go play the piano to begin with, Arthur? Or was he a vocalist from day one?
He kind of, that was kind of, he would play the piano and then sing,
Gotcha.
a song here and there. Then it became, I think, really after Champion of Love, it kind of became, well, let's let Gerald sing another song.
Another thing, now that we're talking about the 1980s, Daniel, that the Cathedrals brought to the mix that a lot of people don't realize was the 1987 album Symphony of Praise, done with the London Philharmonic Orchestra. Okay?
Yeah.
And Arthur, I would argue that album put them at the pinnacle of every Southern Baptist church in America that really didn't embrace it. Yeah.
Churches were changing. Churches were going, their music was changing. They were getting more out of the traditional, leaning toward the contemporary side. And you're right, Daniel, they were able to fill both of those needs. They could go in. They were able to change hats and fit in wherever. That was what they could do a concert. They could show up at convention and do the tenor and the bass stuff and that sort of thing. But then they could turn right around and do these beautiful songs of worship and they kind of filled both sides of it, and that's really what opened their door.
Yeah.
No doubt.
I mean,
no doubt.
If you listen to that Symphony of Praise album, when it opens up with Revive Us Again, I mean, they should have just singled that. I mean, that's my favorite rendition of the song of anybody. And they don't even hardly sing the whole song. They just sing a little chorus of it before the whole tape starts. I don't know if y'all remember that or not, but
I do remember it. Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And that was huge when it came out, because that was cutting edge. I mean, nobody, I don't think anybody in Southern Gospel even thought about that. Much less done anything like it.
Arthur, I hate to throw this back to a Hamill conversation because we're talking about the cathedrals. But can you imagine Hamill getting in a plane, going to London, England? Because they did go to London to record the thing. It wasn't just a picture. It's not like a lot of groups do to now, and they get symphonies playing behind them when they send it over there where the guys pay $20 an hour to get a full symphony in Czechoslovakia to play. They were actually playing with a London feel, which it's like the Boston Pops. It's a major name in the business. Can you imagine Hamill getting on a plane, going to London, and saying, "Hey guys, we're gonna cut Mississippi live in London"? I mean, just
yeah.
And This Old House. I mean, to me, that's iconic. I almost chose that as my favorite because I mean, you can't hear that and not smile. And
just hear the Philharmonic play Cajun fiddles. That's amazing. I mean, who thinks of that stuff? But Larry Goss, I think, was a big. You look at the cathedrals. You look at George and Glen, what they had, but they also had Larry Goss. Larry was, man. You look back at the hand and the fingers that he's had in different artists and what he's done for Greater Vision and cathedrals. You see his hand in that work. That was a big thing for him too. The cathedrals kind of dabbled a little bit with that. In the 70s when they did the cathedrals with strings and the cathedrals with brass. I mean, those two albums were ahead of their time.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. I don't know enough of the history on that to really know who that was that really said, "Hey, let's do that." I don't know. I don't know the history of that. I just remember those albums, and they kind of pushed that envelope a lot.
Arthur, I'm guessing here, and again, this isn't I'm just guessing. But that would probably, I'm going to throw credit to that, to Canaan's probably Marvin Norcross, probably put that
Yeah,
on
probably
them.
so.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just guessing, because, it was Marvin that helped them get on the Gospel Singing Jubilee with the
Yeah.
Florida Boys for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway,
Yeah.
Daniel, you mentioned your favorite cathedral song. You heard mine at the beginning. So I'm going to box you up. And that means we're going to ask you this at the end of the show, Arthur. So you can play with all the songs in your head as we're talking. But Daniel, what's your favorite cathedral song?
Well, I feel like that's hard. It's hard to narrow it down because, I mean, you could easily have 4 or 5 that you could
It is.
put
You could have
equal.
dozens.
You could, yeah. But even if you want to say, well, man, if you put a gun to my head, it'd probably still be 4 or 5. You'd have to choose. But I'm going to go with this because I got a good story with it, and it's probably about 1982 or 83 on the album. Something Special. I think it was "Step Into the Water."
Yep.
And in that's maybe that's an interesting one to choose as a favorite. But I loved it so much so I was always a wannabe quartet kid. Okay, and so I would save my money and. Don't laugh, but I would spend all my money at the Radio Shack, okay? And I'd buy all these microphones, and what do you call them, Arthur? The stage monitors, the floor monitors, those speakers they're wedge cut, right? I had big stage monitors in my room. Well, I drug them out to the back deck where we had a swimming pool. And I set
Was
these
it an
stage
above ground
monitors-
pool, Daniel?
It
Or
was an above ground pool.
I knew you was
Listen.
in South Georgia, so it had to be an above ground pool.
And I put these big, felt fabric covered stage monitors up on the deck and cranked up the Step Into the Water, and that was my pool. That was my pool music. Now Darren's got another story about gospel music at the swimming pool, but that's for another day. But anyway, Step Into the Water. That was I'll say that's my favorite, and it's a good one here.
Did Kirk write "Step Into the Water"? I can't remember who wrote that.
I think so.
I think so. Yeah.
Here's what I'm noticing as we talk about George and Glen, and as gifted as they were, and as gifted as they were together, because they came from 2 separate backgrounds. I mean, Glen from the polish of the Weatherfords. And I will say this about the Weatherfords, and Steve's a friend, but we can talk about harmony this day and time, but those guys were always perfect pitch, perfect note for note singers all the way through. Everything they ever done with Lily Fern.
Yeah.
And they were perfect. So Glen comes from that background, okay? George comes from for lack of a better word, he's a hardcore quartet man. Blue Ridge. I mean, that was as hardcore as J.D. Sumner and the Stamps, quite frankly, And for those two to be put together, and then you listen to the names that we've been able to put around them: Kirk Talley, Gerald Younce, Gerald Wolfe, Ernie Haas, Mark Trammell, George Almond Webster, Bobby Clark. You listen to these names. We take out, this just doesn't happen. This is God preparing something to evolve that was bigger than they could ever imagine. And then, Arthur, you telling me the story, and I had no idea this before we started, how they took a step out of the concert world and said, you know what, we're going to take a step back and concentrate on that church life. Okay? Well, concentrating on that church life tells me that these guys were really praying about their ministry side of their entertainment business. Is that fair to say, Daniel?
Yeah.
And I'm not assuming a whole lot here. I'm just saying, because they had the opportunity to go that Oak Ridge Boys route. Yeah. They had that opportunity to go that Gaither route, and they took a step back and said, you know what, this church stuff might be where we need to be. Am I imagining the wrong thing here, or am I? You think I might have something? You tell me, guys.
I think they saw a need or a void that was available to fill with the right kind of music.
There you go.
And we say that to the Cathedrals, not to any detriment to any other group that chose whatever route they went, whatever, that's just was their decision. And I think that was probably more of it than anything to see the need of like that the church music was changing. There's going to have to be somebody that could fill that open void and to be able to fashion themselves to be able to go into that and fill that opening, you know.
Daniel, I tell you what, let's take a break. Let's play your favorite song, Step Into the Water. I'll let you go out and get in front of the above ground swimming pool. We'll take pictures and put it on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. We'll come back. We'll talk Cathedrals 90. We'll talk Cathedrals homecoming. We'll even talk Cathedrals retirement. And we'll get Arthur's firsthand perspective of one of the greatest moments in NQC history. And because he was there, at least that's a great buildup. And if he wasn't there, he can tell us why he wasn't, because after 30 years in the business, he should have been there that night. Is that right, Daniel? But we'll play your song, and we'll be back on SGNP.
Well, what do you say about this next young man? Nobody has ever come along in gospel music like him. He's an institution within himself. Would you welcome Mr. Kirk Talley?
I was thrilled with Step Into the Water. I wrote that song after hearing a preacher, Phil Hoskins, just use that phrase in a sermon that he preached at a revival that the Cathedrals sang in Lenore, North Carolina. And we were sitting back in the choir, and behind Phil, we had sung and he was speaking. And he said, it's time we as Christians need to step into the water. And I don't know why that struck a bell with me, but I just knew there was a chorus there, and so I took out a pen and paper and wrote the chorus, and then I put verses to it just a little later. George's part on that, in the bass part, see, coming from a background that a non-male quartet background, I didn't hear the bass part as it did it, but when we got to record, George put the bass part on there, which really made the song. And that song was the first song that I'd ever written that ever got on a chart. And so it was kind of like, it helped establish me as a writer, I think. And it was number one for 9 months in a row.
Step into the water. Wait out a little bit, even deeper. Wet your feet in the light of His water of His life. Step into the water. Wait out a little bit deeper. Come join angels singing praises to the Lamb of God. It's time we the people stand up for what is right. It's time we squared our shoulders back and raise our swords to fight. For the Bible is my weapon and the Spirit is my shield. The church needs more of its members to be workers in the field. Step into the water, wade out a little bit deeper, wet your feet in the water of His love. Step into the water, wade out a little bit deeper, come join angels singing praises to the Lamb of God, to the Lamb of God. There is victory for the Christian who walks the narrow way. There has been a prize appointed for the soul who does not stray. Oh, I want to live for Jesus and be all that I should be, so that I can rest with Him forever, live eternally. Step into the water, wade out a little bit deeper, wet your feet in the water of His love. Wade out a little deeper. Come join angels singing praises to the Lamb of God, to the Lamb of God. Step into the water. Wade out a little bit deeper. Wet your feet in the water of His love. Step into the water. Wade out a little bit deeper. Come join singing praises to the Lamb
the great Cathedrals here on SGMP. Daniel Britt, Arthur Rice, Darien Southerland, and we are talking all things cathedrals, just really paying tribute as we just reminisce, I guess, our stories, our perspective of this group. And I had an aunt, a great aunt, Aunt Laverne. She loved the cathedrals. Everybody has their favorites, and a big, like Arthur was talking about earlier, 3 or 4 or 5 groups would come and be on one Civic Center stage, and everybody had who they were there to see, and boy, she was all about the cathedrals and put that name in my mind as a kid and something special. I will say as we move into probably the late 80s, 90s, I'm going to guess around that time, I've got a copy of this somewhere, and it may be somewhere on the internet you can find, but Moody College, Moody Broadcasting, and the college there in Chicago would do those Friday night sings. You know what I'm talking about, guys? These,
Yeah.
I think they were 5th Friday night.
Yeah.
Well, probably the biggest one in their history, and as the people that were there told me, these college kids went wild, bonkers, crazy for the cathedrals. I think Buddy Green was part of their band that night because you hear banter between George and Buddy, and the harmonica is present. But that's one, and again, back to having the layers to that group. That's one that when you can get college kids excited, with all the resources available to Moody to bring any artist in they wanted to, and the cathedrals packed that house, and it translated on radio. It was very, very special. It was electric.
It didn't hurt the cathedrals too bad that they just happened to be at that studio that day with Bill when Bill called all those old folks in, Hovey and Vestal and the Spears and all that George and Glenn just happened to be there that afternoon and was in that original Homecoming video. Yeah. That's another great invitation they got that they didn't, that video wasn't planned like that. They just happened to be in Nashville. I mean, or they drove down there from Ohio because Bill told them to.
Yeah.
But
I'll tell you funny, a little history for that too is, Hamill was the first one that had that idea about getting together, telling stories.
Really?
Yeah, it was, I think it was him and Brock and JD, and I can't remember, George may have been a part of that. But they were just sitting around, at the, I think the Hyatt in Nashville at Quartet Convention restaurant. They were eating breakfast one morning, and they were just telling old stories. And Hamill said, we ought to do this and record it. And everybody just laughed and said, that's nobody would be stupid enough to buy anything like that. and then here we go, just a few months later, one of the greatest things that ever happened to our music.
Do you know who did it originally, Arthur? You may. You may tell you who did it. Charlie Waller did one called Live in Atlanta, where he brought in folks like Hovey and Bill Shaw and the Sunshine Boys and Chief Clout and, Eva May and the Harmoniers and Naomi and the Seagulls. And they did it in a church fellowship hall in Atlanta. I used to have that VHS. Wow. I don't know where it's at anymore. I think I gave it to Tony Peace when he was doing his TV show back in the day, Daniel. So ain't no telling where it
was.
Is
that now. The one when was Wendy Bagwell there?
Yeah, Wendy was there.
Yeah. Okay, I've always wondered where that video came from or originated from. Yeah.
But Charlie Waller and Bill Shaw, who passed away recently, put that thing together because Atlanta used to be the powerhouse place, back in the day.
Oh,
that's a pretty cool video if anybody's got it, and it's good stuff. But you talk about the cathedrals in the 90s. They exploded. Yeah. They exploded. And Arthur, they went from singing in those churches like we're talking about to filling arenas by themselves. I can remember calling Ed Harper one time, saying, Ed, I want the cathedrals. He said, you can't have them. And I said, why? He said, guy come in and bought 20 dates. They're booked up. That was unheard of in gospel music since the Statesman Blackwood Brothers time. That a promoter would come in and buy every date they had and put it together like that, because cathedrals were packing out Six Flags. I mean, everybody else was on the show too, but I mean, you were there, you saw it. When they came back, Arthur, what was the difference? Was there a difference, or was it just what was it? What was it between when you first was with them and you were second with them?
Well, they were able to. I think when they came back, they really took a command of the audience. It was, they could do that easy, pretty stuff, very worshipful songs, and then turn right around and do a quartet song. Something like Moving Up to Glory Land or Just Started Living or something, that's just full bore Southern. And, it's like you were talking, Dan, you were one of that college, most of those college kids, they weren't used to that 4-part harmony. A few years ago, we went to Nashville, did that songwriters thing during Praise Week, and when we started singing just as a quartet, most of those songwriters and people they'd never heard that kind of music. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know, and to hear a bass singer go down and hit a double OC and tenor go out of the sky. They just never heard that, and it was so fresh and new to them that they just commanded the stage to be able to do that, and it really set them apart.
Yeah. It was probably the 90s. You probably go back and find out when this facility was built, but in Perry, Georgia, the Georgia National Fairgrounds, it would have been pretty new. And I was there for a fairground appearance of the Cathedrals, and you're talking about packing it out. They had bleachers. They had, it was covered, but they had the, I don't know how many thousands were there. And of course they were sweating up there in that heat, but they didn't let it affect them. And so you had two things happening. You had probably like less glamorous type staging, but at the same time, such an overwhelming large crowd. And so those two things coexisted. So you saw the showmanship, you saw the professionalism, you saw the popularity. At the same time, you saw kind of that down home roots kind of thing happening where they're just up there with some fans trying to keep them cool under those stage lights in the hot Georgia sun.
When you look at them in the 90s, and as an advertising guy, I don't know if this was Larry Goss. I don't know if this was Canaan helping them. I don't know if this is just blind luck. It had to be the Lord's hand.
Yeah.
But you got George and Glen, two older gentlemen. One has the it factor in George Younce, meaning everything he says, the audience draws from it, okay? You have Glen, who, if George is Andy Griffith, Glen is Barney Fife, in a way. He's a great second. Does that make sense to you guys? Then you've got a good-looking guy, 6'4" basketball player, or 6'2", 6'3", 6', I don't even know how, and Ernie Haas singing tenor and moving around like every young person in the crowd. Scott Fowler standing there playing the bass. Everybody loves him, good-looking guy. And then the late Roger Bennett, who everybody can say, man, this guy looks like Daniel Britt. He's just an ordinary piano player sitting over there just playing the piano. And they're able to mesh all those generations together. And from a brand perspective, they're hitting every element of the audience. Yeah. And think about this. You didn't see that with a lot of quartets. No. Most quartets, everybody was roughly the same age. This is two, maybe three generations of folks here. And I think that, so a son and a dad could listen to them together and both identify with them.
Yes.
Daniel, one of our mutual friends, and Arthur, you may know him, the late Rollo Green, okay? He was the biggest Cathedral fan I ever knew. Cathedrals come to Marietta, Georgia. He was chief of Cobb County Police. He would get on the bus with them and sit and talk with George for hours. They'd go over to their house and blah, 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 blah. But him and I, the Cathedrals was one of our common loves because of that, So it just brought it all together.
Well, and George could play off each one of those personalities too, and either play with the personality or lean on his strength there. And I know, like Roger, so George was funny, Glen was funny, Roger was funny, and so you got three of those strong personalities, and then the parts that Scott and Ernie would bring in, and of course they would, whippersnapper, they'd bring some age humor in there with that, but I loved it, and it was good, and it was electric and multi-generational. That's good. That's a good point there, and you really could attract all.
Arthur, I'll ask you a personal question.
Yeah.
I don't know how much one-on-one time you had with either George or Glen, but do you ever remember a one-on-one conversation with either one of them, or being in a group setting and hear them talk and you were like just glued to it and saying, hey, this is, I need to listen to this. Do you have any instances like that? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but is there anything you could share with us that you remember?
Yeah, and I say this, and I say this about a lot of or most of the older artists that came along during that really kind of 70s, 80s platform. They treated me with the most utmost respect. I mean, they were always, and they didn't have to, but it was like when you reached that level, you were like a part of I don't say clique, but you were part of something that was unique, and they always just I just anytime they any of those old guys talked, I was just glued to whatever they were saying, because they had so much history and so much experience, that you wanted to listen to them, and just their kindness to you made you respect them even more. And I think I respected that as much as I did their talent. Just the fact that they were so kind, and so generous with their time. I remember, shortly before George passed away, he came to convention one time. I didn't get to see him a whole lot. During the convention was usually about the only time we got to see him, and so he came backstage and was fixing to go out, and he was kind of sitting under the bleachers, kind of in the dark, and I walked over, and they, he had a couple guys around him to kind of keep people away from him, just kind of, his hips, was really having health issues and that sort of thing. But he waved me over, and one of the guys came and got me, and I went over and got to talk to him, and it was just like it was 40, 30 years ago. I mean, it was just like, just one-on-one. It was just a special time, and I appreciated that. I mean, he never treated me any different, whether it was in front of people or backstage and nobody around, just me and him. It was just total respect, and he and Glen both, and we're just super to be around. I love that about them.
I can only imagine being a singer with George and Glen in the audience, and how much cheerleading and encouragement you could feed off of just those two alone.
Yeah,
because they seem to always be cheering somebody on when they've got a mic in their hand.
Yeah, and that's a great way to put that. They were great cheerleaders.
Yeah,
and I think that's one thing that I have learned. That I learned from really almost all of those. Brock Spear was one of the biggest cheerleaders that I ever was around. Eldridge Fox, those big names, they were cheerleaders, and that meant a lot to a young kid coming along and really, just a nobody, because that was long. That was way after I was, had left Kingsman, and I was just, for a lot of people, I was just singing with a theme park group. I was nobody, and so they didn't have to be nice to me, but they were.
Yeah,
and I always appreciated that. I always appreciated that, and so that's what I've kind of tried to fashion. I've tried to be a cheerleader for anybody that's come along, because I thought that's a cool trait that I really want to cultivate, and that when someone says anything about me, that I would be a good cheerleader for them.
Mm-hmm.
Arthur, this year will mark arguably the 25th anniversary of one of the top moments in National Quartet Convention history, where in 1999 the Cathedrals made their last appearance at the National Quartet Convention. And when they made that appearance, they made it without Glen Payne. You were singing. You were singing at. Well, you were the Kingdom Heirs at the time, or
Yes.
the Squire? Okay, you were the Kingdom Heirs at the time.
Yeah.
Did the groups know George was about to pull Glen in on the video and bring him in live, or was it y'all were all in the hall or in the atrium talking, and somebody says Glen's on with George, and everybody ran in? Tell us about that night. And I know I'm leaning on you a lot here today, but you saw it firsthand, or you were around it firsthand. So, and it's one of the years I didn't go. Daniel, were you there that year by chance?
No, I wasn't.
But we've all heard the stories.
Yeah.
I tell everybody it's one of the three greatest moments in my lifetime. I'm 54 years old. It's one of the three greatest moments of National Quartet Convention history that I can remember. And tell us about that moment, Arthur.
Well, I'm sure that that NQC board and knew what was going on, but for the most part, the fan didn't know anything, and I was just as big a fan as I was sitting in the auditorium, listening to that because I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear them. This is their last chance to get to hear them, live, and when they brought Glen on the phone from the hospital, and that was such a it was such a sudden thing too, because it was like they were at their pinnacle. It was that they couldn't have been any bigger. Really, it was like Elvis and the Cathedrals.
Right.
They were known in every genre of music. And at that time, and then all of a sudden for them to say, well, we're retiring. And then it just seemed like the next day, all of a sudden, Glen, who had never been sick a day in his life, they'll tell he never missed a date. He never had any kind of sickness. I never heard him when he had a cold. As far as that goes.
Right.
And then the next thing you know, he's in the hospital and he's dying
of liver cancer.
It was such a shock and such a.
And Arthur, let me pause you there. From the outside point of view, I think you're right. It happened so fast. It was a chicken or egg situation. I think probably the general public assumed that his health forced them to retire.
Exactly. And it really, from what I understand, that didn't have any bearing on it at all. They had made that decision before he even got sick.
Yeah.
It was just like, it was just so sudden. It caught everybody off guard, and so everybody was brokenhearted, anyways. Thinking that they were retiring, but then you put on top of it, well, we may never see Glen again. May never get to even hear him again. The nice thing about George is you still got to hear him. With the old friends and his solo thing. And with the Gaither thing, you still kind of got to hear him, but you're never going to hear the guy again. And then when he sings, I'll not have to cross Jordan alone. There wasn't a dry eye in the building. It was a phenomenal moment.
Yeah, it really was.
Think about this, Arthur. Now, Daniel and I have heard the "I Won't Cross Jordan" rendition via tape or VCR or whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
And we hear him sing, and I can hear him singing the song in my head just right now as we're doing this show. Okay. You heard it live, but anytime going forward in life, we hear anybody sing the song "I Won't Have to Cross Jordan Alone," we'll compare it to an amateur hospital bed rendition.
Yeah.
And I say amateur, not by an amateur singer.
Right.
I'm saying an amateur recording that's done over a audio phone. You're a producer. You're not going to release that to the general public. You follow what I'm saying? But that's what we remember. That's one of those it moments.
Right.
In the history of gospel music. If you could frame that and put that in the Hall of Fame, that's one of those moments you would do. You follow what I'm saying? It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Just amazing. And then Glen passes 2 weeks later on October 15th of the same year.
It's one of those moments where you remember where you were at when it happened. When you heard the news,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, it's one of the three big. I consider it in my lifetime one of the three biggest, if not the biggest, NQC moment ever.
Yeah.
Along with the legendary JD calling Michael English up out of the crowd and the night of 9/11 and night of 9/11. I mean,
Yeah.
Three big times. I mean, just it is what it is.
Yeah.
Is what it is. Daniel, you've got to be around Gaither more than any of the rest of us. Okay, you ever had a conversation with Gaither about the cathedrals and what he thinks? And I know you're not speaking for him. I know I'm asking you a secondhand question.
Well, and I think Arthur mentioned producing, and that's part of that history. There's a time or two where Bill came in and produced, and you can tell, you can hear the difference, the Larry Goss influence or the Gaither influence or whatever. There was of course, there's a big moment, I think, from the homecoming world at Carnegie Hall.
Yeah,
and they tell me I had the last interview with George before he passed. He was at his home, and I was in Atlanta there at Salem Studios in Buckhead, and it was snowing in Ohio, and it was just an easygoing conversation. George made everything easy, I feel like. But George told me the story, and Gaither's told the story about the pacemaker going off at the last note. Old friends were singing, and the song escapes me which one they wrote, but big ending and low note, and of course, like a statesman quartet man that he was, not gonna let it interfere. The show must go on, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they escorted him off stage and got the ambulance crew back there and stayed with, and that was George's story. George's story wasn't, hey, I hit the note, I held the note. George's story wasn't, that. It was about the men, the fire department, I think the first responders who were there to be honored. They were going to parade across the stage, and everybody was going to applaud because right after 9/11, they chose to stay back and miss their moment of glory on stage so they could sit with George and make sure he was okay. And that stuck with George, and that's
awesome.
That's a good moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me tell you all this right here. Here's another great George story. 1997. Daniel, this is shortly before you started with me at Salem.
Yeah.
I had a little short-lived TV show on WATC in Atlanta, if you remember that. Or you may have been with me. I can't remember. But I had sent letters out. This is before email. I had sent letters out to every gospel group saying, hey, I'd love for you to be a guest on the show. And this is back when we played VCH tests, VCH tapes,
right.
Video disc jockey. So I come in the office one Monday morning, and there is a huge box, not just one little tape, but there's a huge box. And George Younce sends me a handwritten note along with every tape VCH test that the cathedrals have ever done. Wow. Said, Darren, when we come through Atlanta, if you're recording, we're going to be on your show, we promise. Until then, pick what songs you like at the cathedrals and play them anytime for us. We appreciate what you do. Made me feel like $1 million.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, here's this. I mean, I've got every tape now by the cathedrals.
Yeah.
Good. And, just good man.
Yeah.
Good man.
Yeah. George did something similar when he came out with his live album or with his solo album. The old friends were at Dollywood, and they sang, and I was at the record table talking to him. And he was telling me about that album. He was so excited. I mean, he was like a kid. I mean, it was amazing. It was like he was so excited about that album that he just cut, and was telling me all about it. And he said, I'll send you one as soon as I get them. And so I said, okay, cool, awesome. Thinking, well, he'll never remember that. Right. And 3 weeks later, I got in the mail a CD autographed by him and just a very kind note in the CD. From him, and it meant so much to me that he remembered, this kid, and would think enough to send me his CD, and that was really special.
Yeah.
Daniel, you're going to laugh at this memory here. Let's talk a little bit about old friends. Okay.
Yeah.
The night they came to Atlanta, they were singing at, I don't want to say it was North Point, but it was another church up in Alpharetta somewhere. You and I were there.
Okay.
I had just run in from a Little League game, and I looked at you and I said, you know what, man? I'm not dressed for this. You go up on stage and you take credit and you get to introduce them and all that. But we got to see old friends.
Yeah.
with George and Glenn, and I tell everybody all the time, Wesley Pritchett had the greatest job for a year of anybody. I mean, Arthur, think about that as a singer, just to get there to sit with Jake, with Jake and George the whole time. And I mean, you got Jake Hess, who was with the Statesman, with Hovey.
Another class act.
Oh, yeah.
Another class act. Then he started the Imperials and started a whole new sound. Then all of a sudden you got another world over here with George Younce. And one of the things that we've not mentioned on this tape in this interview today is how transparent George was, even with his own battles in life, and how honest he was on stage of that sort of thing. So you've got those two guys and, Ernie and then Gary playing the piano.
Yeah.
And I still wish I could find the sheet music for that song that they sang. What is it? Look up, fear not, the angels.
Glory to God in the highest. Yeah.
Glory to God in the highest.
Yeah.
Darrell Williams wrote that.
Yeah. That's the greatest Christmas song.
Yeah.
That was singled in July that I ever heard.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Hey, by the way, just because it slipped my mind, we're on Christmas. You can't let this show go without talking about the Cathedrals a cappella Christmas album, which I think is just, I mean, if you don't have that next to Bing Crosby at Christmas time, you need to cash your Christmas card in somewhere,
Absolutely.
It's so good.
Well, even the first one they did with Kirk, I mean, was incredible.
Yeah.
The arrangements that Goss put on the vocals, was orchestral. It was
right.
It was great.
Yeah. Well, guys, we could sit here and talk about this fun stuff all day long, but we're nearing that time where we got to cut it short. Arthur, I know you're the president. I know you're the president of the SGMA, and everybody looks up to you. Nobody says one bad word about you, but we're going to make everybody say one bad word about you today because we're going to say, Arthur, tell us your favorite Cathedral song and why it's your favorite song. And then that way all our listeners can say, I can't believe he didn't say this or that or blah, blah, blah. But what is Arthur's favorite Cathedral song?
Wow. It is so hard. I'm like you, Daniel. I mean, you can just put them in a hat and draw one out and it'd be great.
Yeah.
But I love their cut on Moving Up to Glory Land. I just thought it was. I know Gold City did it and did a phenomenal job, but they did a job, and it was just as good. And you can't really compare them. I mean, you can't say one is better than the other.
Right.
But I like them both. But I like the Cathedrals version because you don't hear their version very often.
Right.
And here's what I'm going to say, Daniel, and this is why I'm laughing on this video for those watching. Arthur knows I've got to go back and find the songs and input them into this into this podcast to make it work. And he knows I can't go on YouTube and find the Cathedrals Moving Up to Glory Land just readily available because it's not there. Okay, so he secretly planted that in on me, Daniel, and I'm going to tell you that. So Arthur,
well, you might find a version with Ernie singing it, because they did it with him,
right.
And I'll give props to Ernie too, because man, I'm telling you, Ernie gleaned a lot from George and Glenn, and then old friends, and then to be able to take what he learned and turn it into, I mean, he did, what he did with his quartet is exactly the same. I mean, they found a niche somewhere that nobody else was filling, and just blew it up. And so you can't not give props to him for learning.
Can I tell you this? I don't want to sound, I don't make this negative. We recently played Turn Your Radio On by the Cathedrals. And, as a radio guy, I just like that old Albert E. Rumley song. And I like I kind of like the way that it's been adapted. Spears did it and Gaither's done it. But I think credit goes back to Ray Stevens on that little intro. And so... So we're gonna play the Cathedral. You can play the Cathedrals. That's cool. I mean, they're a good group. We've established that on this show. And I kind of went into hearing the song thinking this is just going to be a ho-hum version of Turn Your Radio On because it's not like the others that I just mentioned. And I kind of probably, if I'm being honest, I probably tried not to like it. I'm like, I've got my favorites, and I know this is not going to be my favorite. And doggone it, did they not slow it down a bit and put their own unique touch to it? And it's like, I can't help but not like it now. I mean, it was
I know,
so good.
I know.
Yeah, like right when we're talking about moving up to Glory Land, you got different groups are going to put their signature to it.
And you're right. I heard, I had that Ray Stevens album.
Yeah.
That had that song on it, and everybody that cut, everybody cut it at one time, and I always compared it to Ray Stevens. Well, it wasn't as good as his,
Right, exactly.
I understand.
Good stuff.
That's funny.
Good stuff. Man, we could talk about the Cats all day long. George and Glenn, Ernie, Scott, Roger, Gerald, Kirk, Bobby Clark, George Amon Webster.
Yeah.
I mean, Arthur, did they ever approach you about coming over? Go ahead and tell us a secret. Did the Cathedrals ever call you and say, will you come sing with us? You can go ahead and let it out today.
No. I tell you, the first time that Glenn ever, I had just went with the Kingsmen. We worked with them in Columbia, South Carolina at the Marat Temple. And it was a yearly singing, it was us in the Cathedrals. And first time I'd ever met them. And I didn't even have a song. I actually brought a song with me, and it was one that Danny did called I Just Started, or Whiter Than Snow, and that he recorded with the Singing Americans. And I did that song, and I was standing in the back and was listening to the Cathedrals, and as they finished, I was still standing back there, and Glenn come walking by me, and he said, first thing he ever said to me, he said, Rice, you sure can sell a song, and just walked off. That was the first words I ever heard out of his mouth. But coming from Glenn, that was a huge compliment. And, I didn't understand it at the time. I had no clue, I just sing loud and proud. That's all,
That's right.
But, that was a huge compliment for him. And so I remember that moment just like it was yesterday. So,
Arthur, last question for you. We'll get out of here. They're doing these cathedral reunion concerts now with Fowler and Funderburk and Trammell and Wolf. Yeah. How hard is it for Pat Barker to cover George Younce?
No, I think anybody, for anybody to stand there and try to cover George is incredible. But he does a great, he does a great job. He really does. He's got that comedic edge to him also, that George had, but he does a great job covering him. He really does.
Good stuff. Well, man, this has been fun. I like this. This has been, it's a little different than what we're used to. We usually have a guest, and we've got some great guests coming up. The Collinsworth family said they're coming on pretty soon with us. Miss Jeanette Cook's coming on pretty soon with us, and some other folks. And
look forward to that.
Yeah,
we're working on some fun stuff, and talked to those folks the other day. But guys, you know what? Let me say this: it's an honor for me to get to talk to you two guys, because you two guys work in this industry every single day, and all I am is a super fan now, and I get to just listen and talk and give my opinion, and it's fun. It's fun.
Well, and we may have stirred up some good opportunity for comments on the cathedrals, because it's like opinions. Everybody's got one, and everybody's got a good memory of the cathedrals and where you first heard them, or where the pinnacle of their career and you saw them. Yeah.
Think about this right here, and this is going to age us, and then we'll close. The young guys with the sound never saw the cathedrals in person.
Yeah.
Chances are Autumn and Amber of the Neelands never saw the cathedrals in person unless they were 2 or 3 years old and can remember. Okay? Think about how many. Joseph Haberdink was probably, under 15 years old when he heard the cathedrals. The Crabb family, they were kids when they shared a stage on them homecoming videos with the cathedrals. Think about it. And it's been a while. It's been a while since we've got to hear them. 25 years. 25 years. And Arthur, thanks for sharing the magic with us. Daniel, thank you as always, my friend. And Arthur, I'll ask you one last question before we get out of here.
Yes,
What's wrong with living right anyway?
Not a thing.
Not a thing. You're listening to SGNP. Check us out on Facebook. Southern Gospel News Podcast. See, Daniel, I was supposed to let you do that. I don't ever do it. So anyway, we'll figure this out one day when I'm a professional radio announcer like you.
That's right. The Southern Gospel News Podcast online, Facebook, the website. Check it out.
There we go. We'll see y'all next week.
And Kirk Talley here absolutely made this song famous all across the country, called "Moving Up to Glory Land."
I like to think about a paradise somewhere beyond the blue. A mansion waiting in the eastern sky, maybe next door to you. We'll go parading the distant star right down the Milky Way. The planet Jupiter, Neptune and Mars won't even be halfway. Moving up to glory land. Oh, it's a moving, holding to his no sky hand. Don't know when I'm leaving, but I'm ready to go. When I get to heaven, I'll be welcome, I know. Don't you know I'm moving up to glory land. I made my reservations long ago, the day I gave up sin. And when my mansion ready, this I know I'm gonna move right in. I have a vision of a happy place where friends and love wants me. Right on the corner of Love Avenue and Hallelujah Street. Moving up to glory land. Oh, yes, I'm moving, holding to it in the stars. Don't know when I'm leaving, but I'm ready to go. When I get to heaven, I'll be welcome, I know. Don't you know I'm moving up to glory land. Moving up to glory land. Oh, it's a moving, holding to the stars. Don't know when I'm leaving, but I'm ready to go. When I get to heaven, I'll be welcome, I know. Don't you know I'm moving up to glory land. Moving up to glory
Is there somebody on the phone?
Yeah, there's somebody on the phone. Oh, you guys sound great.
I think I recognize that old voice.
That old voice. I think you do too.
Oh, Glenn,
I
God.
love you, Ernie, George, Scott, Roger.
Oh, bless your heart, Glenn. We love you. We're so glad you called in, buddy.
I am so tickled to say hi to all the people that prayed for me. I'm in the hospital at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, but I'm doing better. And the Lord is going to touch me. I know it beyond a shadow of that.
And we do too, man. Yeah. Yes, baby. Yeah.
It's so exciting to hear you guys sing. I'm so
Glenn, I tell you what, I told the people last night, because of my health situation, you've walked on the stage without me a lot of times, but this week was the first time I've ever walked on stage without you, and I miss you, buddy. I really do. I ain't got nobody to pick on, you know.
well, you pick on me on the phone.
Okay. You know what, Glenn, we don't want to tire you out, and thanks for calling in. And I know this is would you do something for me, buddy? I'll never ask you anything to do for me that you didn't do willingly, but I'd ask for you to do something for me.
I'll do anything in the world. Oh.
All all of a sudden, you used to sing a song for me once in a while, just sitting on the bus riding down the road. I'd ask you to sing a verse of this song for me, and you'd look over at me and sing it, just riding down the road. Just act like we were riding down the road one more time, and
Okay.
could you sing me a verse of I Won't Have to Cross Jordan Alone?
I believe I can. When I come to the river at a need, when the last winds of sorrow have blown, for there'll be somebody waiting to show me, 'cause I won't have to cross Jordan alone. I won't have to cross Jordan alone. Jesus died all my sins to atone. When the darkness I see, He'll be waiting for me. I won't have to cross Jordan.
Oh, Glenn.
Thank you, National Convention Board. I love every one of you.
We
I
all love you,
all
buddy.
of you.
We all love you, buddy. I hope you can feel our prayers here today.
I feel your prayers. I feel your prayers. And I just can't wait to get back to Saturday.
Hey, Glenn, it's Roger. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Buddy, I'd give $100 to see that nurse that come in to check your blood pressure just now when you were singing.
Well, my doctor's standing here right now waiting to take my blood pressure.
Well, that's the luck.
And I think I'm going to be sky high.
That's the luckiest doctor in the world right there to get a concert from you, buddy. We love you.
Well, I love all of you. I want to thank every one of you for every call you've made, for everything you've done, and all the people out there in the National Quartet Convention. And I want to thank the board personally, and I want to thank everybody for being so nice to me during this trying time. You know what? I'm going to win, because I've read the back of the book, and we win. And I love you all, and I'll never forget you.
We love you, Glenn. God bless you. Get
God
well.
bless you, George.
Hurry back, buddy. Can't wait to hug your old neck again.
Well, I can't wait for you to hug my own neck and me to hug your old neck.
Yeah. We
So
love you.
just tell everybody I love you.
We will, Glenn. God bless you.
Love you.
Love you too, buddy.